welcome everybody to this webinar and discussion on the project Online and Offline Livelihoods and Analysis of the Gig Economy. I'm Balaji Parthasarathy, and with me is Professor Sridhar and Preeti Mudaliar, who are my colleagues and who are co-investigators on this project. At the outset, we'd like to express our gratitude to the Azim Premji Foundation for supporting the research and the project. It was actually supposed to end sometime in March, but thanks to the pandemic, we were forced to extend the deadline and the completion of the project because fieldwork was badly affected. But we're happy to say that the end is now in sight, and we wanted the insights of experts into some of the findings that we've gathered from the field. In terms of the structure of today's webinar, what we would like to do is first we'd have my colleague Sridhar provide an overview of what it is that we've done, the broad sort of the sketching out the project itself, the initial findings, and then we'll invite our four experts, Abhishek Shekaran, Mr. T.K. Arun, Neha Malhotra Singh, and Saurabh Tukral, to both react to some of our findings and what is it that's been presented, and also draw on the rich and diverse experience on the topic of how labor works in the platform economy, right? So with that, let me turn the floor over the screen over to Sridhar for the presentation.
Thank you, Balaji. So let me just give you an overview in about 15 minutes on what this project is all about and what we have done. This is the project, as Professor Balaji mentioned earlier, funded by the Azim Premji University. So what is unique about our work? So I just want to pause a little bit here. So there has been a lot of work which has been done on worker. There has not been much work which has been done on worker welfare. In fact, a lot of work has concentrated on consumer welfare on the digital platforms. There has been some prior studies on worker welfare, which basically looked at labor standards and Rogers on employer precarity. But most of the studies were focused on ride sharing. Most of the studies have been focused on ride sharing. So we want to depart from this particular study, apart from whatever which has been done earlier. And we are going to focus on worker welfare and not so much on consumer welfare, because consumer welfare, there has been a lot of work which has been done since 2014, consumer discrimination, consumer surplus, and so on, especially again with respect to ride sharing. But we want to focus on worker welfare. The second thing is we want to be different from the studies which have been done earlier on ride sharing. Right? We want to look at two specific sectors. One is the beauty workers sector, which is provided mainly by women, right? And also the house maintenance sector, which has been provided mainly by men, right? And as you can see in India, all of these are gig workers, whether they are working for an online platform or not on an online platform. And therefore, we want to make a differentiation here. So we are basically looking at all gig workers, but across online, that is those who are employed by online platforms, such as Urban Company and so on, and those who are on contract through offline without using digital platforms as the medium of work. So that is the comparison that we'll be doing across online and offline, across beauty workers and house maintenance workers. So we want to triage the findings. We have done an extensive survey. I'll talk a little bit about the survey instruments that we have used. We have also done some analytical modeling using agent-based modeling to corroborate the findings and also do a long-term prediction on how, for example, labor markets will move in this particular sector using cues from the survey. And this one is about expert views, right? So we want to get your opinion on what we have done so far and also what you think are the factors that affect this particular sectors. So we have done an extensive survey of workers, right? So basically we collected a lot of information through exhaustive interviews on demographics, the kind of employment related facts, such as, for example, worker preferences and employer expectations, both online and offline across beauty workers as well as the house maintenance sector. We have also looked at kind of professionalism, which is expected and which is provided in the particular sector, especially with respect to skill levels, whether there are opportunities for upskilling, whether the workers use certifications in order to showcase their skill levels and so on across these two segments. We have also looked at some examples of customer reviews and feedback, but we have to be very clear that we are not looking at the customer side in this particular work at all. So we are basically constrained to work under worker welfare. We have also looked at how work gets allocated both in online and offline, the flexibility that is offered, negotiability between the worker and the employer, the kind of commute they do, the kind of wages they get, and so on. And we have also looked at some shifts in the labor market from online to offline or offline to online. We have also looked at, for example, how knowledgeable the workers are in onboarding, especially on the online platforms. We have also looked briefly at the effect of COVID and lockdown on online and offline employment in these two sectors, as we also were affected to some extent by the COVID. So what are the main issues and challenges in this particular gig work, especially in the beauty workers space and also the house maintenance worker space? For example, the producer or the worker, they have certain preferences towards wages, not only on salary, but also on some incentives which are provided based upon their work they do. They also have some non-wage preferences. It has been traditionally mentioned that the online platforms, even they claim that they provide a lot of non-wage, non-wage, they adhere to certain non-wage characteristics, such as, for example, providing more leisure and so on. So we want to verify whether it is true or not. And also, we want to find out what the workers' preferences are with respect to non-wages, such as, for example, safety and security, flexibility that the job offers, and so on. We have also looked at professionalism, whether it is required or not, how professional the workers are, how they prepare themselves. We also look at skill levels, whether they do the skill improvement or whether they don't do upskilling. These are the two characteristics that we want to observe. We also look at some labor contracts, right? Whether it is flexible contract, negotiable, what is the bargaining power? Is the bargaining power is towards the worker or the employer? Are they rigid or flexible? We also try to look at shifts in labor markets, as we have mentioned before. We also look at firms and platforms, whether these platforms or the firms have significant market power. And in such cases, whether there is any dominance or the bargaining power is shifted towards the employer. We also look at whether these employers or the platforms provide worker welfare. So these are broadly somehow, it looks a lot, but these are some of the things that we want to elicit from our surveys and also analytical modeling. So we basically divided this particular work across beauty workers and house maintenance workers. We have a control group, which is offline. That is the traditional mode of employment by word of mouth or whatever it is. These are gig workers, and therefore they normally get into employment to work for contractors, building contractors, or salon contractors, and so on, by word of mouth or by just through their social networks. That is the control group. And we want to compare it with our experimental group, which is those who are employed in the online gig platforms, such as Urban Company and so on. We have carried out surveys, extensive surveys in Bangalore and Delhi across these two areas. So we have surveyed about 30 each in each of these cells. So together, we have interviewed about 120 workers in the online gig platform, those who are employed by online gig platforms, and 120 in the offline traditional employment. So totally, we have surveyed, based upon the attributes that we have discussed earlier, about 240 workers in these two segments across these cities, and both experimental group as well as the control group. So general observations. So we want to, as Balaji mentioned earlier, we are still analyzing the data. So this is not complete yet. But in general, we have observed some characteristics with respect to the beauty workers, right? So in the beauty workers, generally, with respect to the employers, with respect to online employers, as we know, there are only few in the market. So it's basically a duopoly or a max oligopoly market. And they seem to have a lot of bargaining power, these online platforms to employ beauty workers, right? So what we have observed is that some of them adhere to the incentive classes that they provide, based upon the amount of work they do. Some of them do deviate from the clauses that they have with the workers. So that is something, a general observation that we have made. Some of the online platforms also provide incentives based on skill, right? As they are, so there is a motivation for the employers to skill improvement, especially in the beauty worker segment. What we have observed in offline is that there are many in the market who are basically contractors who employ this, or salons who employ these beauty workers. Normally they provide only salary, and there is no incentive mechanism as is being provided by the online platforms. With respect to the workers online, in generally they are non-wage preferring. That's what they would say, that they want some flexibility, they want some kind of leisure to as economists would say, trade-off between wage and leisure. But they also self-adjust. If they are unemployed for a long time, they self-adjust their reservation wage or leisure until they get employed. They have all the incentive to do skill improvement. That's one of the things that we have observed in the beauty workers market. They constantly work at their skills and then try to move up in the professional hierarchy. If the employers deviate from their contractual clauses, some of them don't have any opportunity and therefore they stick to the current employers. Some of them leave and then go back to an employment pool and try to find out another job. The workers in the offline segment, they are basically wage preferring, and they self-adjust their wages or leisure and then until they get employed. But what we have observed in the beauty workers segment is that there are a lot of freelancers, right? And the freelancers are mainly work with online platforms, and they are basically sort of rigid about wages, right? So because they have to take care of a lot of things at home, and therefore they prefer to work as and when they get the opportunity, and an online platform provide those opportunities for them. But the freelancers, as they are entrepreneurs, they always look at self-skill improvement all the time, right? So these are the general observations that we have made about the beauty workers. With respect to house maintenance, the chart is a little bit sparse here. The reason being that we have not looked at, we have not come across employers who significantly provide incentives, especially the online platforms, if they do more work, right? So they are moderate, they provide moderate wage offerings, they don't provide higher wage offerings. But at the same time, the online platforms, even though they claim that they provide a lot of flexibility and leisure, normally the workers complain that they get less leisure, right? Less leisure and less free time when they work for online platforms. The offline platforms, they are basically low wage offering. Most of these are contractors who try to provide low wage, but ask them to work for a very long duration, including the holidays and so on. So this market is a little bit different from the beauty market that we have discussed earlier. Now, with respect to workers in the house maintenance market, they self-adjust, but there's no, we haven't seen many freelancers as in the case of the beauty workers market, right? In the house maintenance, most of them either stick to their employers, and they are not freelancers, they are not entrepreneur oriented, they don't really do a lot of skill improvement, and therefore those aspects are missing in the house maintenance market compared to the beauty market. So these are the general observations that we have made. We have also did an analytical modeling to sort of simulate some of the things that we have observed in the survey. So basically, we have looked at the workers who have certain preferences with respect to wage and non-wage, and the employers with respect to the wage and non-wage that they offer. But we also looked at some regulations, right? So for example, is it possible that the workers and the employers do self-regulation with respect to wages and non-wage characteristics in order to get the market equilibrium, or should the regulator come in, right? As we have, as we will discuss during this particular webinar on, a regulation on minimum wage or minimum hours that that the employer has to spend and so on. So we looked at these two conditions and tried to simulate certain scenarios and see which one is better. We've also looked at some metrics such as, for example, the unemployment rate, just the traditional frictional unemployment rate that we observe in the labor market in both online and offline. We've looked at wages, how wages offered move depending upon the conditions, and also the profit of the firms, right? So these are the different conditions that we try to simulate. So we have done simulation of various scenarios, the baseline scenarios being no regulation, then with self-regulation by the workers and employers, and with the regulator being present, giving certain restrictions on minimum wages and leisure that the employers have to offer, or co-regulation, right? The self-regulation by the worker. And if it doesn't work, the regulator comes in and then puts in some minimum wages and leisure that needs to be offered. So you see, these are the different scenarios that we have simulated based upon the field work that we have carried out. So I won't go into the details, but this is just a general snapshot of what we have observed during the analytical modeling in the beauty markets, with 20% of the workers being online, freelancers who prefer to be working for online platforms. We have looked at firms that offer incentives based upon extra work that the workers do. There are different conditions. The firms do not deviate and provide the incentives. The firms do deviate and then cheat basically the workers. The workers on these conditions, they can prefer to leave, or they do not leave and be in the same worker with the worker, right? The online platforms. So this is basically some of the scenarios that we have outlined here. As we look at the offered wage, if the firms do not cheat, obviously the offered wage in the market goes up. But if the wages cheat on the incentives, that means that they do not offer incentives as provided in the contractual clauses. Generally, the offered wage hits a lower level. With respect to unemployment rate, you can see that if the firms do not deviate, adhere to whatever is there in the contractual clauses, workers stick to the employers, and therefore, in general, the unemployment rate comes down. More and more workers get absorbed in the labor market. Whereas if the firms deviate, then you see the unemployment rate is a little bit higher than what it would be otherwise. Okay? And the profit of the firms, as we can clearly see, if the firms cheat, the profit of the firms increases, whereas in other cases it is a little bit lower. So these are some general observations that we have got using analytical modeling, and we have done an extensive modeling exercise based upon the field observations that we have made. So that's a gist of what we have observed, both in the field as well as in the analytical modeling. Now I will leave it to Professor Balaji to take it further in this particular webinar. Over to you, Balaji.
Thank you, Sridhar. That was an overview of the work we've been doing so far, and in terms of the interviews, the surveys conducted with the workers, and the agent-based modeling that is drawn on the findings on the field to generate and look at a variety of possible outcomes. And now, of course, we turn to the experts for their insights, their reactions to what we've sort of sketchily presented, and also their insights into this phenomenon that many of you have been sort of studying closely, intently, from your own perspectives, asking different questions and so on. So we request each speaker to sort of speak for about roughly 15 minutes or so. And I'd like to begin with Abhishek Shekaran, who's a researcher with the Center for Internet and Society, and who works at the intersection of informal labor, gender, urbanization, and migration. At CIS, he contributes to on-ground research on digital platforms and their impacts on worker rights, social inequality, labor policy, and the future of work. He was previously with the Institute of Social Studies Trust and has been engaged as an independent researcher on projects related to garment work and its gendered implications in the National Capital Region, as well as male engagement for gender transformative programming. Abhishek was an urban fellow at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, prior to which he completed a master's degree in applied economics from the Center for Development Studies, JNU. Over to Abhishek.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Balaji. I'd like to start by thanking IIITB and the entire team there for inviting me here to contribute to this discussion. I've made a small presentation which hopefully will augment and add to many of the things which we saw in the earlier presentation. So I'll just start with that. Now, in order to highlight the socio-political and economic divergences between the traditional and the platform economy, I will begin by providing an overview of the current scope of the platform economy in India by discussing the extent to which platforms have penetrated across sectors and geographies, the business models which they deploy, and their impact on labor relations. I then move to critically reviewing briefly the current landscape of social protection for workers in the platform economy. So digital platforms have been on the rise over the past decade in India. And as Professor Sridhar mentioned in his presentation, they've kind of expanded to multiple sectors. So data presented over the next couple of slides borrows from a recent scoping study that CIS has conducted in partnership with ILO's Geneva office and the Indian Institute for Human Settlements in Bangalore. So we mapped over 513 platforms across 14 sectors in our economy. These platforms taken together have raised over 47 billion US dollars in external funding from venture capitalists and private investors. Now, there are many kinds of digital labor platforms that we came across. For starters, there were platforms which mediate work and those which mediate exchange of goods and services. In the first category itself, there are different ways in which work gets mediated. One is when workers and consumers are in geographical proximity to each other, such as in the case of beauty work, house maintenance, etc. You can think of Uber, Zomato, Urban Company, these kind of platforms to fall under this category. These are termed as location-based platforms. In the case of some other platforms such as Upwork or Freelancer, mediation of work or service is location agnostic. Workers could be located anywhere in the world and working on short gigs over these platforms. And hence this category has been called online web-based platforms. Now, the graph on the left is just to show the growth of the platform economy and its penetration over time. So it kind of plots the distribution of founding years of platform companies that we mapped across sectors. And as is discernible, digital platforms have steadily grown over the last decade and even exponentially over the last 5 to 6 years. On the right, the table provides an overview of some of the tier 1 and tier 2 urban centers, which are witnessing a deepening of platform mediated service delivery. Now, while operations for a large number of tech startups within our economy tend to be concentrated in metropolitan centers, there is growing evidence that expansion of platform geographies is happening in tier 3 cities, small towns, and even rural areas. Also, just to understand, the ways that the platforms function and how they implicate on labor relations, it is important to understand how capital relations are framed within this sector. So in order to do that, I'll just quickly present a bit about the business models which platforms use. The figure on the left represents the distribution of different business models which we came across, and 3 models become dominant within our mapping. And these are used in different permutations and combinations. So number 1 is an on-demand model, which provides services with very short turnaround times. Again, the example of this is Ola, Uber, Zomato, Urban Company, these kind of platforms. The second is a marketplace model, which basically provides listing functions and matching functions for workers and consumers and enable businesses to businesses transactions or business to consumer exchanges. And the third model is a digital placement agency, which are a platformized counterpart of agencies which has long served as intermediaries in feminized sectors such as domestic work, care work, and medical services. Platforms deploy varying levels of control over wages, tasks, and working conditions across these different models, with the greatest being in the case of on-demand platforms. Additionally, platforms earn revenues by charging various forms of service fees from workers, consumers, or both, the most common of these being in the form of commissions. Now, the figure on the right displays the profitability of these platforms across sectors. It is notable that while the degree varies sectorally, majority of the platforms report losses. So for instance, Ola, which has raised up to 4.2 billion US dollars of external funding since 2014 when it was founded, has consistently reported losses. And these have been as high as $4.4 billion in financial year 2018. So therefore, while on the one hand, platforms are based on extraction of surplus value from workers through many strategies, which Professor Sridhar discussed in his presentation about cheating wages and incentives from workers. Despite this, platforms continue to be hugely unprofitable. And despite that, they continue to raise funding consistently from private venture capitalists with the sole aim of establishing market dominance. So we estimated over 19 million registered workers and business users across these sectors and platforms in India. Cloud work, ride hailing, and agriculture account for the highest share of registered workers, with over 70% of the total number of workers that we mapped belonging to these three sectors. Now, this number does not equate to the total number of workers in the platform economy in India, which is difficult to estimate because employment relations in this sector tend to be non-exclusive, and workers can be registered in a platform and not use it. But it still provides a good sense of the scale at which employment relations are being dictated by labor platforms in our country. The table on the right provides an overview of some of the jobs in which platform workers are engaged across sectors. Without discussing that, I'd like to just discuss the context within which platform labor has emerged in India. So unlike in the global north, labor market choices of workers who joined platforms have to be read against the fact that informal work has been the norm in our cities, with most workers not having access to decent work, workplace safety, non-discrimination, and social security. Work on platforms such as Ola and Uber, who first led the first wave of exponential growth of platform workers in India, was marketed as giving the ability to be your own boss, to increase earnings, earn more, be a professional, be an expert, and many such aspirational values. Even policymakers were discussing the possibility of platform work to formalize the largely informal workforce in our country. Early research which emerged in the platform economy seemed to complement some of these predictions, where unlike in the global north, some workers did experience increased earnings in the short and medium term, which lent them greater financial literacy and resources for long-term accumulation of assets. However, once market dominance was established through predatory pricing techniques such as large incentives and discounts for consumers, workers began reporting reduction in earnings, changing incentive structures, high debts, and an acute inability to earn even minimum wages. This became particularly aggravated during COVID-19. For instance, delivery workers witnessed a reduction in base pay from rupees 35 per order to rupees 15, which is a 60% fall. Such experiences gave way to growing discourse around new forms of vulnerabilities and issues faced by platform workers. So this slide basically tries to lay out the differences in the working relations and employment relations between the traditional sector and the platform economy. One of the most salient features of platform work is that it is mediated through algorithms, which are black box and opaque and optimized to provide heavy discounts to consumers and low incentives to workers. Workers have very little control over wages, working hours, and tasks that they will be performing. Wages are determined unilaterally by platforms at hourly rates and are often based on very arbitrary metrics that could include incentives and bonus, such as rain bonuses, nighttime bonuses, etc. These incentive structures are also constantly changing and have been lowered year on year, as has been evidenced in platforms such as Ola, Uber, and Zomato. There are also significant differences regionally. So the rate cards in Bangalore and Delhi are completely different. And even within cities, so there are multiple rate cards even within a city of Delhi. And the logics of this are unilaterally determined by platforms and only known to them. Workers are often unable to make minimum wages and also bear many indirect costs associated with long waiting times, opportunity costs, long commutes, fuel prices, and loans for fixed assets, such as vehicles in the case of ride-hailing drivers. In addition to this, algorithms act as constant surveillance systems, monitoring quality in very intrusive ways and even during non-working hours. Strong information gaps pervade employment relations in the platform economy. We spoke to workers in the domestic work sector who did not know that they had been registered on the platform, and in almost all cases had no understanding of how the platform works. These experiences seriously put to question the logic of flexibility and autonomy that is often associated with platform work. Workers lack legal recognition as they are termed to be independent contractors rather than workers, which makes them invisible for social protection. In addition to this, they face many other risks associated to their health and well-being due to the intensity of work that they are constantly engaged in. To take a case on previous on-ground research conducted by CIS, platformization within the domestic work sector has led to increased earnings owing to professionalization of services such as house maintenance, deep cleaning, etc. But at the same time, we found that this has also led to masculinization of such work, wherein in the traditional sectors, these service verticals were populated mostly by women workers. When they got platformized, they became male dominated. As a result, platformization in this sector has furthered gender-based segmentation of the labor market. This is going to be my last slide. I'll just take 2 minutes. So these workers, along with informal workers in general, continue to be largely ignored in 3 of the 4 labor codes that were implemented in 2020. Only the Code on Social Security has, for the first time, offered a definition of platform workers and included them under the ambit of social protection. However, even within this inclusion, there are many challenges and lack of clarity. The definition does not clarify whether workers who are differently defined as agents, sometimes contractors, sometimes service providers, sometimes micro entrepreneurs. Platforms use a variety of adjectives to describe workers, and the code actually does not clarify whether all of them are platform workers or not. It does not account for subcontracted working arrangements which are emerging in the platform economy. But most importantly, it does not extend universal protection to platform workers, but instead introduces eligibility criteria based on age and on the fact that workers have to be engaged on platforms for a minimum period of 90 days prior to registration for them to be able to consider eligible. However, there is no clarity on how this 90-day window would be calculated, given that workers might work for more than one platform and have significantly long working hours, which can go up to 15 hours per day. Furthermore, the code also proposes to set up a 5-member national security board for gig workers and platform workers. However, it does not clearly define the timeline for the constitution of this agency, offers little insight into how nominations to the board would be decided, and does not clearly define the extent to which workers' representatives would be nominated for this board. Again, importantly, the code fails to consider key protections which have evolved as safeguards for platform economy workers, which includes algorithmic audits, data sharing, and transparency agreements between platforms and workers. I'll stop.
Thank you, Abhishek, for providing that overview and then wrapping up your presentation with the idea or talking or demonstrating or arguing how this tentative approach to regulating the platform economy is just that. It's very tentative at this stage. Okay, so thank you very much. And with that, we'll now turn to our second expert, Mr. T.K. Arun, who's the consulting editor with the Economic Times. He regularly writes columns and editorials in the newspaper, including those related to telecom, the digital economy, and amongst others. He was the paper's resident editor in Delhi, headed the Economic Bureau, and looked after the editorial page in the past. He's been with the newspaper since 1994, except for a 2.5-year stint with the dot-com world between 1999 and 2001, when he edited an online portal called Narad Online. He has worked as a technical advisor at the Kerala State Planning Board before beginning his career in journalism in 1992 at the Observer of Business and Politics, New Delhi. Mr. Arun did his master's in economics from the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU. Over to you, Mr. Arun.
Thank you. I must disclaim any expertise in this area, or actually any particular area. I only have some general observations to make. I came primarily to learn from other people who have worked on the economies. In the first place, I think methodologically speaking, you have to create a distinction between informal work per se and gig work. Right now, that doesn't seem to be there. Almost anybody seems to be considered a gig worker. Now, gig work ideally should be when there is a formal contract between the worker and the employer or the platform that assigns the person some work, so that there is some kind of enforceability of the contract. That would seem to be more, better definition of what a gig worker is. Uh, well, there has been a lot of debate on the desirability of gig work per se. We have seen this California law, which has outlawed gig work. We have seen London court asking Uber to classify its workers as workers. So there is a general reluctance to treat gig work as a separate form of work, which can possibly do some benefit to workers and to society at large. Uh, I think in a country like India, where most workers are in informal work without any kind of social protection whatsoever, gig work might actually be a step forward towards formality. I know in many cases it doesn't work out that way, but that potential exists. And I think through better regulation, it should be possible to do that. As we have seen, most of the platforms that organize gig workers to deliver services are making losses. It is only because of the infinite patience of providers of capital that these kind of losses are being sustained. Well, you might say, just yesterday, Uber declared profits for the first time for a quarterly profit in its history. So possibly there is some rationale for funders of these kind of services to be patient and wait for profits to materialize. However, if generating profits becomes important for these platforms, then they have a vested interest in ensuring that the workers they employ do a good job, that they have commitment to that platform and to the work, and that they are skilled and they stick around, which means that even if they are not regular employees on the roles of the company, they will need to think of ways to enhance their platform's appeal to the workers. And I think that is in the inherent logic of this business model. Now, the question is, how can this actually be regulated to ensure that workers do get some benefit? Now, as Shekhar explained, only one of the 4 labor codes actually makes a mention of gig workers. And there it says that platforms must contribute to the Social Security fund for these people. And that is capped at around, say, 2%. Actually 5%, but normally it will be around 1 to 2% of their overall revenue. So, which is not actually all that small. If you assume that a platform takes a maximum of 20% of the fee for providing a particular service, and of that 20%, if 2%, 2 percentage point of that revenue is passed on to the worker, that is about 10% of their earnings. So that is not all that low level of contribution if it actually materializes. Now, I mean, there are 2 ways of looking at how social security should be provided, especially in a country where people switch jobs, where they migrate from one geography to another sort of jobs, and permanence of jobs are increasingly jobs is increasingly disappearing. There is possibly a case for providing social security to individuals rather than social security tied to their status as a worker. After all, everybody who is born in this country should be entitled to some kind of guarantee of social support by the state. How that is financed is a matter of detail. You might finance it through taxes on profits. You might finance it by asking employers to contribute. You might finance it through some other means. But ultimately, it is you are achieving this by direct financial support by the state or by specifying that employers should contribute some money. Now, when a gig worker is sort of defined as somebody who's engaged through a contract, it becomes easier to enforce this kind of a contract and enforce the regulation applying to those service platforms. If you are required to contribute 2% of your revenue to employee welfare, this can be done. However, I think what needs to be considered even more is the possibility in an economy like ours of organizing the present unemployed people into large labor cooperatives so that the platforms engage not with the individual workers, but with this cooperative, or it could be a company also, which are managed and run by these employees, so that when they need a worker for a particular time, the company can internally decide whom to dispatch. So while the relationship between the labor cooperative or company and the platform is that of like that of a between a gig worker and the platform, the relationship between the labor cooperative or company and the individual employees would be that of a regular uh, company, where the employee is employed by the company, and the company can be regulated to ensure that it provides all the social security benefits that a company is entitled to, and the company is supposed to as per normal regulation. Now, there is no reason why we can't experiment with this kind of a format. Now, another striking thing about the nature of gig work is the supposed information asymmetry between the workers with regard to not only the platform, but also with regard to other workers. No, I don't see why this cannot be overcome in this age of social media. It should be a simple matter for uh, an NGO or a small labor union to create a social media platform where all gig workers in that particular area are allowed to gather themselves, aggregate themselves, and exchange information on how much they are paid, what the working conditions are, what are the kind of work hours and treatment by different platforms. It should be a fairly straightforward thing to do. And I don't see any reason why this cannot be done. It seems to be more reluctance on the part of our trade unions to engage with modern technology uh, and use the technology for their own workers' benefit. I'm sure there are other bodies which can come forward to meet this particular gap. Now, whereas in the case of certain other types of gig workers, I mean, who are, say, people who log on to the Mechanical Turk or Microsoft's GitHub, where people post the work they require, and people take up that work, and the work is executed, and they are paid for it. They are also they are actually the original gig workers, and that should be properly be understood as gig work. Now, in their case also, there is no automatic provisioning of their social security, their health insurance, their post work retirement benefits. So possibly there it is, it could be possible to regulate their that work arrangement to ensure that a certain proportion of their fees are automatically docked and invested in various social security measures as health insurance or retirement benefits. And that can then it is like a cost to company of an employee, where a regular employee salary comprises, apart from the take-home pay that he gets, certain benefits that the regulation says the employer should provide, and that is paid into the appropriate health insurance or social security benefit, retirement, post-retirement benefits, etc. of that employer, and that can something be enforced. Now, I think we should understand that gig work is a new form of work, and that is inherent in the nature of the evolution of work per se, where many kinds of work are geographically doesn't require proximity to the employer, where the nature of the work is such that the employee or the person doing the work can determine how long the work should take and how long he should work, or he or she should work. And the quality can be checked by software or by the person who assigns the work, and doesn't require constant supervision by somebody else. So where work satisfies these kind of criteria, it is inevitable that it should become gig work, and that work should be recognized as a legitimate form of work that benefits both the worker, the person who provides the work, as well as those who employ them. And uh, in this, general indignation at the way these platforms make use of very low-paid, underpaid workers in India, and while they themselves get very fancy funding and salary from global capital, which makes its way to India's venture funds and private equity, we should not forget the positive benefit that this new form of work can actually provide. I think right now that's all I have to say as an opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arun, for your comments. Without sort of jumping into the discussion directly, I just would like to pick up on one point that you made about the distinction between the formal workers and gig workers and the need for or the contract being a distinction. I think one of the realities that our field work has demonstrated is many of these workers were neither provided a contract nor were even aware of the existence of one, rendering that distinction very fuzzy or hazy. So just, I mean, I don't want to sort of get into a long discussion right now, but just to sort of toss that out from empirical finding from our work.
Sorry, there is a power cut here, and unfortunately, Professor Balaji had to log off. Another couple of points about Mr. Arun's remarks. So one is the agency, the agency providing workers to the platform and the contractual relationship between the agency and can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Exactly. Yeah. The contractual enforcement between the agency and the workers. You mentioned those kind of a model, right? So that also we have observed. We have observed in, for example, beauty workers. There seems to be a lot of agencies, even in the case of house maintenance, there seems to be a lot of agencies who supply workers to the platforms, right? And we are not sure whether there is a contractual arrangement exists between the agency and the workers. So that we need to, that is still fuzzy and it is not imposed at this point of time. We agree that, definitely in the more informal, the way in which the platforms have played their role in the labor market, maybe in a developing country such as ours is quite different from that in the developed countries, and we should look at it a little bit differently, whether they have improved employment, we have reduced unemployment rate, improved wages on the average, and so on. So that point is very well noted, and we will get to hear from the other speakers as well. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So now we would like to invite Ms. Neha Malhotra Singh to give her views. Ms. Neha Malhotra Singh is an independent economic consultant working with the Research and Insights team at Janagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy. He is currently undertaking a perception survey of city leaders in Haryana to understand issues in urban governance for a study for the 6th Haryana State Finance Commission. In the past, Ms. Neha has undertaken a number of research studies in the areas of digital transformation in the manufacturing sector in India, assessing demand for online schooling in India, and creating a database for indicators on affordable housing in India, to name a few. Recently, she undertook a study for the Asia Foundation on the platform-powered gig economy in India. She has also been a senior lecturer at Jagdish Sheth School of Management at Vijayabhumi University in Maharashtra. Ms. Neha obtained her MSc in Economics from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Over to you, Ms. Neha.
Thank you so much
for your views.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this panel. And I must congratulate all of you on the study that you have conducted. I think it's probably going to be the first time that we can see some real quantification around what is going on in the platform-based gig economy, especially in the sector of beauty workers and home services, because so far we've mostly seen opinions everywhere. But this is going to be, it'll be great to see this kind of quantification. And I feel that quantification always helps in, driving implementation of recommendations to improve the state of affairs for these workers, because you can see a real impact on employment and other such parameters like you showed. So, many congratulations to all of you for the study that you've undertaken. Moving ahead, I would, I'm really excited to share some, interesting insights about the platform-based gig economy that I found during my interaction with gig workers academia, even customers. When I was doing a study for the, which was funded by the Asia Foundation sometime in November. Fortunately, the sector that I picked up at that time was also beauty workers and, gig workers who provide home services. So I think it'll help us, come out with a really interesting complementarity. I just want to, as I share the findings, just want you to keep in mind that this was the sector that the study focused on, and I'd essentially only spoken to workers in the urban company. So we should keep that in mind as you hear the findings, because we can't generalize in this sector. I found that you can't generalize the characteristics across different services and even across different companies. So just bear that in mind. Um, I think my first insight that I would like to share is that this platform-powered gig economy is extremely attractive for women. As we all know, India has one of the lowest female labor force participation rates, and a key reason for this is that there is a disproportionate burden of unpaid care work on women, be it child care, elderly care, or domestic work like cooking and cleaning. And in the interviews with women gig workers, I found that the flexibility which the platform economy offers them to choose how much to work and when to work is really attractive for them, and they are sort of able to manage their unpaid care responsibilities while also being able to earn a livelihood. And this was also something which the men gig workers said, while they may not be completely responsible for household work, but they were all really happy to be their own boss in some sense. And it sort of gave them an escape from having to report to like a manager in a contractor firm where they have to explain why they are late or why they took so much time to do a certain task. So they had the liberty to manage themselves, which seemed to be really attractive for them. Another interesting insight that I found was that being able to work, just being able to work, we'll come to the conditions later, but just being able to work provided these women particularly with a great sense of economic empowerment, social empowerment, and even personal empowerment, right? So they were able to make some money, and from what I heard from most of them, they were able to make more money than they could while working in regular salons and beauty parlors. And this was also true for men. They were able to earn more through the urban company as compared to working in physical shops. And it gave them a lot of confidence, a lot of independence. A lot of women talked about becoming a part of the decision making process at home. For example, I remember one worker said that now even before a packet of tea is bought, my permission is sought. For them it's a big thing, that because now they have suddenly become contributors to the household income. They have become part of the decision making process at home, and they're able to stand up to a lot of regressive social norms and customs. Also, working in this gig economy through these platforms has given them a lot of personal empowerment. A lot of them are able to now own assets like a mobile phone, like a scooter. Some of them have even taken loans, bought a flat, bought a car, and they all the feeling of apna kaam came out very strongly in most of the interviews that I did. So this is really sharing the good part about the platform gig economy. It's great. It's a great opportunity for India, where so many of its informal workers are finding meaningful employment, especially women. However, as most of the panelists mentioned earlier, there are a number of issues associated with this sector. The first one being that the opportunity for men and women didn't always seem to be equal, right? The work in the platform gig economy is highly gendered. As we all know, women are mostly providing the salon and spa services, and men are normally the electricians and the plumbers and all of that. And when I spoke to customers and women gig workers, The first reaction was sort of a sense of surprise. I asked them that, would you like to be a plumber? Or I asked customers that, would you be okay if a female plumber came from urban company instead of a male plumber? So the first reaction was really a sense of, surprise, as people had not thought about women doing these non-traditional roles. And I feel that this is indicative of the deep-rooted gender stereotyping around livelihoods in India. A lot of women gig workers also talked about interest. They said that, we are not electricians and plumbers because we don't have interest. So I think this also is sort of indicative of gender stereotyping in India. However, the good news is that as I spoke to them for a few minutes, I could already see their frame of mind kind of switching, and they moved from surprise to like, if we get the right training, I don't mind doing this. If this gets me more income, it would be great. And the customers were, of the opinion that if they can do the job, I don't care if it's male or female. So, while there's a difference in opportunity, but then there is hope to sort of, get this together. Uh, there was another interesting finding on parity in pay. Like I mentioned earlier, that characteristics are very different in this economy based on the nature of service. And earlier there was a study by Team Leaves where they said that there is an 8 to 10% difference between pay of male and female delivery executives. In the salon and spa services specifically, I found that the pay of the women workers is actually higher than men, because the value of the salon and spa services is much higher than those of electricians and plumbers and all. And this was also something one of the company executives said in an interview with him. So this is kind of like a unique feature of this sector, which is different from the delivery services per se. um, then, the earlier panelists already talked about lack of bargaining power and things like that, so I won't, talk about it again. Briefly, again, earlier panelists already mentioned about the issues with regulation, right? So there is a Social Security Code 2020 which has come up, and it seems to offer some hope. However, it's still to be implemented, and there are a lot of loopholes here. uh, One thing that I would like to say about these workers being defined as informal workers, right? So I believe that they're not exactly informal. They're sort of at an interface of formal and informal workers, and I completely agree with Mr. Arun when he said that this is India's step towards formality. And as regulators, or as society, we forgot to recognize that the reason that customers choose an urban company or a yes madam over the local beautician is because these apps bring in a certain kind of formality to the system. So I think this itself speaks for maybe creating a third category, or thinking a little bit more about not formal and informal, but something in between. And working with these apps has given these gig workers a lot of professional identity. It has probably given a lot of them bank accounts, and there is a decent amount of control also that these platforms exert over these workers, right? So if you have an urban company beauty person come to your home, she will be wearing a dress, and in COVID you will see there is a certain protocol that she is following. So there's a fair bit of control that these organizations impose on these workers. So there is a need to sort of rethink about whether they are really informal workers per se. Also, just before concluding, there was a, in spite of all these sort of issues that have, that exist in this sector, during my study and while I was talking to these gig workers, there was a beautiful story of hope and loyalty that I saw amongst them. In spite of all these problems, they all seem to be very confident of, the livelihood that they can earn through platform work. And most of them did not have a very strong thing to leave. So I said that, these are some of the issues that you guys face. So would you ever consider going back to a beauty parlor and working there? And none of them were interested to do that. So which is, for me, it was a very good insight into what, those guys are thinking. And so for us, I feel that, the gig workers have kind of settled for the life and the opportunity that platforms provide to them, right? And I also found a lot of them saying that things like provident funds or insurance and all of that, it's not an immediate priority for them. So, if I may quote one of the male gig workers, actually, he said that I don't feel the need for security benefits. I'm dependent on my own money. If I'm able to earn more, I will figure out the security of my life. So, they have it seems like they have sort of made peace with the situation, and it's probably better than what they had before. It's really for us as, society, as regulators, to think about this more strongly, that is this really the best that we are able to offer these people. And I think this is really the question, and this regulatory vacuum which exists in this sector needs to be filled really, really quickly. And if we are able to fill that, I think there is a lot of future in generating employment in India, through this sector, as a lot of the earlier panelists also said. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha, for your comments. Just a couple of quick reactions at this point, and then we'll leave it to the next speaker and then to the final discussion. I think you're absolutely right in the sense that, you know, there's a wide range of platforms, and you can't brush, you're not trying to paint everybody with the same, you're not trying to tar everybody with the same brush. There's a difference in occupations and so on. There we recognize all of that. And even other studies have shown that certain platforms like the Urban Company and so on have done much better than many of the other delivery platforms. So it is sort of, there is a sort of a variegated landscape of this thing. The larger issue is, do we necessarily see these as a zero sum game, saying that you get employment or you get these, like you put up with these rotten conditions. And I think those are things. And one last point about saying, the story that you mentioned at the end about saying, oh, I don't care about my security, I want income. Then our regulation, if you look at the 4 labor codes, the income bit has not been addressed. If our research, it's only gone to the code on social security. So research like this, whether it's yours or what we're doing or what many others are doing, should be able to inform policy to plug those holes so that we're able to give these people a reasonable livelihood. Okay, thank you. And on that note, to the last but not least, we move to Mr. Saurabh Thukral, who's a senior specialist at Niti Aayog. Over to you, Mr. Thukral.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. This is not my area, but then at the same time, I want to talk about how we can leverage technology in a better way. As said by earlier panelists, that it is not a formal employment or it is still informal. But one thing which is for sure is that at least the transaction, the payment and the transaction is being digitalized, and now that is stored formally on digital networks. Now, earlier that information, how much a beautician was earning or a home maintenance guy was earning or a driver was earning, that information was not available digitally. With these platforms, this information is available digitally, and along with that, their ratings. We may have to improve the rating mechanism of all these platforms, and there can be some standardization around the rating of the workers, but their rating is also available digitally. Now, and they have a unique ID. Now, with unique ID, transaction available digitally and rating can enable easy access to credit for these workers. And that is the change we at government are looking for, that how we can move from physical collateral to information based collateral. If a beautician wants to move and build their own salon and be a true entrepreneur, they will need access to credit. Now, based on their experience, based on their cash flow, based on their rating, can a better credit, a personalized credit provided to them, so that they really move the value change and become an entrepreneur from being part of the informal economy. Now, so in this respect, and a lot of work needs to be done, but the initial step which was taken is that account aggregator platform was launched at the start of this month, where uh, the all the information, as of now it is only for the bank accounts, where the bank statements can be shared with wealth management organization, so that based on the cash flow a better credit can be provided. But I in future the plan is to also bring in this informal economy and use the information which is being stored digitally, how it can help them give better credit. And I will urge the team to also include this in the study, because in the study on slide 4, uh, I have not seen uh, n- item around how better credit can be provided using this digital information. The second good thing which was talked in the study was that the gig economies focus on skill improvement. Now, this is not happening in offline model, and in the online model, this is happening that they are focusing on the skill improvement. Now, why this is not happening in offline model and why this is happening is online model? The only reason which I can see of is incentives. We have more incentives so that they want to improve. Uh, so incentive is one important factor which has to be there. And in the study, when there were two examples where the, the service provider were cheating, right? They were not providing the incentives. Now, it can be a good research to understand what was the impact of cheating to the skill improvement. Were the gig workers still focusing on improving and enhancing their skills even when they were not getting the incentives? So this will be a very good uh, relationship which we can understand more in details. Uh, uh, Another thing which I want to talk about is uh, now from a monetary terms and in the long term perspective, which one is more useful? Uh, should gig workers work with online organization, or they should work with offline organization in long term? As of now, they are they want to get their foot in, so they are providing good incentive both to the consumer and to the service provider. But as we have seen in case of Ola and Uber, the driver incentives have declined over the years. So we need to see not in short term. In short term, we may get a biased opinion, but in long term, we want to see which one is more beneficial to the workers, and then even look from the other angles that uh, where they are improving their skills. Now, if you talk from an economic point of view, if people are improving their skills and they are getting easy access to credit, then gig economy is a very good economy and will help in the growth of the GDP. But then if we want to look at the holistic development and also look at uh, uh, the human index, then we need to also focus on providing them the proper conditions. Uh, so I want to just talk about two more ideas here. Like Arunji mentioned about having a cooperation. We have a similar cooperation in agriculture, which is called the Farmer Producer Organization. Those are the cooperation, and for that, a new ministry has been created. Similarly, if we can have corporations of driver, so that at least and all the gig workers can be part of that, and then the corporation interact with uh, the platform providers, then both will be on the same negotiation power, and that way it will be there will be no difference in the negotiation power, and then more collaborative, more intuitive, and win-win situations can be created. So we can reuse the idea of how uh, farmer producer organizations, and there's a plan to create 10,000 corporation as part of this financial year, or maybe in next 2 to 3 years. But the advantage of that is that it will try to bring some structure to the farmers, and then it the advantage is that then it helps. Once there's a group, then it becomes easy to scale any new intervention. uh, I work on how we can use technology in agriculture. Now if I want to talk to one farmers and I need to do that individually, then it is a nightmare for me. But if I'm talking to a corporation, uh, then it becomes easy to scale the solution. Similarly, here we can borrow that idea from the agriculture sector and have a cooperation here, and then define the rules of the engagement. And once uh, a corporation is powerful, then they will have more important say in the ecosystem. Now coming to the health insurance, and other social benefits, insurance is something which can be something can be implemented within the existing ecosystem. Like if in the aviation sector, for the passenger journey, I can take up the health insurance for a trip. Now that is feasible. Now why, if a gig worker is working for a day, for that day he should get the insurance. Now that is something which is feasible. He may be working with 10 different service provider or 10 different organizations, but on a day, if he's working for that day, even he has completed one trip or one transaction, he should be eligible for some kind of a health insurance, and it can be customized that on a daily basis how it will contribute to the health insurance, so that at least there is some safety net related to the health insurance. If we look at other informal economy and look at the other social benefits, even in the formal sectors, we need to do a lot of work there. But I think health insurance is very, very important. And with our ecosystem and financial services very, very strong, this is something which can be implemented. We have insurance in agriculture and other sectors, so why not here based on the transaction basis or on a daily basis? Uh, so this is something which can be implemented, which is viable both to the digital the service providers like Olas and others, and for the gig workers. I don't see why that is not possible. Uh, yeah, that's all from my side. These are the input from my side. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Subral. Thank you for your inputs. And the one point that I'm going to be picking up on, I mean, you said covered a number of things you talked about credit and so on. I think the notion of ratings is extremely important and actually quite contentious, because until recently, at least, most platforms only provided one-way ratings, customer to the worker. And it's not often that the workers get to rate customers, because that sort of reduces some of the asymmetry that exists between workers and their customers, because ratings are so critical in getting you your next job, what kind of job you get, and that influences the credit and rating and all the other things that you very rightly highlighted. So I think that's something else that we do need to, that we're glad you sort of raised that. We are now at the sort of we've had the experts speak. You heard what we've done in terms of our own work in looking at wage differentials, social security benefits, worker conditions, bargaining power, etc. Now we'd like to throw the floor open and invite questions either to the project itself or questions to the experts. Of course, the experts can also ask questions about the other experts and sort of toss ideas around. It's a sort of a free for all at this point. Please go ahead. I invite you to type your questions in the chat so that we can structure them, and sometimes if there are two questions that are similar or identical, we can post them together. The floor is now open, please.
I had a question on the presentation you made earlier. Could you explain a little bit about self-regulation? What did you mean by the workers self-regulating themselves? Like, how did you account for that in the
Yeah, yes, Neha. So what we observed is that the workers have some reservation wage. That is the minimum wage that they are willing to accept for joining a particular job, right? That's a common concept which is used in economics. And similarly, they might have a reservation leisure. I mean, the opposite of wage, where they want to, have about 16 hours of free time or something like that. Right? Now, if they remain unemployed for a long time, then there is a possibility that they would like to lower their reservation wage or their reservation leisure in order to get employed, right? So that is something that we have simulated. We have not, I mean, we have also gotten some remarks from the field saying that yes, they would like to accept a lower job. What does it mean economically? They reduce their reservation wages, or they reduce their reservation leisure in order to get employed. So that's what we call it as self-regulation. But on the other hand, it is quite possible that the self-regulation, if it takes over a long time period, might reduce the reservation wage beyond certain limits, in which case the regulator might step in, right? So the whole concept of minimum wage regulation is that the reservation wage should not drop below certain threshold level, so that it is not good for the worker at large, right? So these are the two things that we try to do.
Got it. Thank you.
Anybody else? The use of the word online is confusing. Why not platform? Yeah, sure. That is certainly, I mean, there is actually a lot of, what shall I say, there's a lot of terms that are actually floating around. People say platform worker, gig worker, informal worker, or they refer to platforms, online work, and so on and so forth. I think, certainly some specificity is required. The way we've used it, that's all we can, that what we can speak for here, is that we've used gig workers, that is people who kind of work on their own, and whether it's online or offline. And so we say, okay, you work online for an digital online platform, or a digital platform, or you work offline. So what where we made the distinction is saying, okay, you're a gig worker as distinct as from any other kind of worker who can work on a digital platform, or you're working on or where you're working offline. Because the thing is, you can also have non-digital platforms, because, for example, your cab stands in cities or auto rickshaw stands are also physical platforms, in a manner of speaking. Right. So yeah, I mean, there is still some, what shall I say, there's not total clarity on this. So we'd like to specify how we are using it in our project.
There is one more, Balaji, you want to take it? That comparison across countries.
Yeah.
There is
any comparison to the best of my understanding. Hello, Sardendu. There is not there's not enough of it done. I think there should be more done. I think the closest anything gets to an international comparison is the Fair Work project, that's actually doing a study across 20 plus countries. The questions that are asked there are a little different, but yes, that looks at labor conditions across 20 countries. The questions asked there are not quite the same here. But given the sort of the nature of regulation or regulatory vacuum in most countries in the world, I think it certainly is begging to be done, these sort of international comparisons. Yeah. I know it doesn't probably answer your question, but it's just my telling you how little I know.
Actually, Professor Balaji is also a member of the team that does the Fair Work project across the countries, with work being done in India from IIIT Bangalore. So I think Nandana has raised her hand.
Yeah, I think Kamla.
Yeah, Professor Kamla Shankaran has a question. Yes, yeah. Take that, Sridhar.
I typed it into the chat box. conceptually, how did you, in your presentation, Mr. Sridhar, you talked about freelancers and you sort of distinguished them from gig workers, platform workers. I'm just curious to know, how did you distinguish these two?
Yeah. So the characterization of the freelancers is that the first one, they would like to, basically work for an online platform. That so that they will be able to decide when they go to work and when they don't go to work, because they have a lot of commitments at home, babysitting or looking at the family and so on. So that is one characteristic of a freelancer. So they are normally tied to an online platform, but they are also most of the, at least in the beauty worker space, we have observed that they are wage rigid, which means that they don't really lower their reservation wage in order to get employed, right? So they would be very strict about what wage they want to get for employment, and if the wage does not come through, is not offered, then they would just be at home, right? So that is another characteristic. And the third characteristic that we have observed is that these freelancers are really skill oriented, right? So they won't waste their time if they are unemployed, but they would like to upskill so that they will be able to move on to better jobs in the future. So that is a characteristic that we have observed, at least in the beauty workers market of freelancers.
Could I just put one thing on the table?
Please go ahead, Mr. Yeah, sorry. Kamala Sankaran, did you have another question that did you want a follow-up question?
I had a comment on that, but I didn't do it. Thank you.
Okay. Or you can send it to us by chat. We'd love to have your comment.
No, I just want to put one thing on the table. So there are two ways of providing social security. One is sector-specific, delivered through employers, or targeting a particular community. You say construction workers welfare society or board. You provide service to them. The other thing is universal benefits for all members of society. Now, I think we have to, when you think of regulation or improving the working conditions and life of workers in the gig economy, you have to put this on the table. How do we envisage social security for the citizens of this country? Should it all be segmented, only delivered through companies, or should it be universal? Now, if you had universal healthcare, for example, to which we are moving through Ayushman Bharat, which has limited coverage now, and there is no reason why it shouldn't have wider coverage. If you have that, the need for gig workers to have separate health insurance would disappear. Now, then there would be more requirement in terms of their occupational safety aspects. If you are a rider delivering food, if you have an accident, and if you get hospitalized, the health insurance will take care of your hospitalization expenses, hopefully. But the loss in income during this period when you are being treated and you are getting well, who will cover that? So you need to think of a framework in which these kind of questions will be addressed, whether it will be done by the platform or will be done by a general pool of resources to which the platforms all collectively contribute, or will it be funded by the state by collecting taxes from all these people, including the platforms? I think the nature of social security that we have, should it be universal or should it be sector specific or segment specific? That also needs to be part of the discussion when you come up with recommendations on how to improve working conditions. Second thing, skill. Upgrading skill is very, very, I think, important. Suppose, for example, autonomous cars becomes a reality suddenly. All these drivers will become irrelevant, auto drivers. What do? So unless they are able to migrate to other jobs, it is very important to constantly upgrade your skills in the economy that we live in, which changes very fast. If you knew how to repair timepieces, then you are out of a job now, because nobody has a timepiece, mechanical timepiece. You only have electronic stuff. So the need to shift from some kind of skill to another kind of skill, which is currently required, is absolutely imperative. But who will train them? The same timepiece repair fellow has trained to repair a mobile phone. He'll have work now. There's no shortage of work. But who will provide that training? Who will fund that? I think, and these are the questions, kind of questions that also need to be addressed while looking at an overall framework for the benefit of people in the gig economy. And finally, last point about my idea of a cooperation. Now, the shirt I'm wearing was produced by a cooperative, which was founded originally by the workers who was sacked from one of the largest BD manufacturing companies in Kerala. It was called Dinesh BD. And since the workers failed to persuade the manager to take them back, they formed their own cooperative and started manufacturing BDs. It was one of the finest, most profitable cooperatives, and it worked well because the workers were very, very proactive. Nobody could take them over right. They were governing themselves. They were selecting their managers, and they would take active participation in decision making. And the cooperative went on very well till BDs went out of fashion. Then they have moved to other sectors like handlooms or making shirts and things like that. Now, if you have those kind of cooperatives which organize the workers and provide uh, labor to whoever wants a particular kind of worker, then they will be far more useful than a general company like a staffing agency, like a temping agency, like Teams. Now, I think there's no reason why all these migrant workers who come from Odisha to work in Kerala or Tamil Nadu and who are brought in by a contractor, why that contract workers role cannot be taken by a workers cooperative, who would actually ensure that they get a much more decent wage, who will have various incentives to take care of negotiating a better housing conditions or work conditions, so on and so forth. And I'm sure organized sector people would like to interact with a organized body like a cooperative or a company for providing workers, providing skilled workers, than with the individual workers themselves, because then that becomes more tricky. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. There are a couple of other questions I'm going to, I will take down we've noted those suggestions, Mr. Arun. I don't want to respond because we have a couple of other people who have
Sure.
their hand up. The first one is Nandana Sengupta.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Balaji. Thanks. I'm actually really interested in these questions, and I'm working on two related questions. And so I have very specific questions. One, on cloud workers. I found this entire conversation very interesting. I noticed one small slide that Abhishek had on cloud work. It wasn't on cloud workers, but it was talking about the different types of jobs, and one of them was cloud work. And I'm really curious to know which is the predominant industry that's employing cloud workers. What are the types of tasks? These are annotation tasks. What are the skills required? Because these seem to be slightly different from the beauty and domestic workers that we're talking about. So this is a kind of a different segment. And a segment that I believe is kind of understudied. So that was my first question. Then I have a second one, just smaller questions I'll ask it later.
Okay, so let me take that quickly.
Hmm.
You're absolutely right. There are two kinds of platform workers. One is the geographically tethered, and that's what we're studying here. And one of those who do work on cloud. Now, you're right, cloud is understudied because it's very hard to study. You're not able to easily observe them. And you can see a Uber worker, you can see your delivery guys or your beauty workers. These guys, you can't even order the services, okay, because you're working for paymasters in North America or wherever it is. See, there is also enormous geographical variation in the kind of cloud workers you have. Without having detailed study, I can tell you from preliminary preliminary view of the data, is that from India, and this is exclusive data, more than half of them are in the software industry. They're more the high-end professionals. Then you have people doing advertising, tagging of photographs, all those sorts of things. And my colleague Preeti Madliar has done some studies in that area. But in many other parts of the world, it takes on different characteristics. In India, the software industry is actually led into this as a one route. So let me stop there because I don't want to say anything more than what I know.
Maybe Abhishek.
Yeah, sorry.
Abhishek, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I do. I'll actually respond to a couple of things. I'll just take like 2 minutes or so. So one thing is about like this conversation around ratings, which one of the panelists brought up, and about how those could be linked to credit availability to the workers and a couple of other things. I mean, there is a huge political aspect to this as well, because one of the things that is which workers unions have spoken about is that the information and data around ratings is not available to the workers. It's unilaterally only available to the platforms. And this also differs like sectorally. So like in Ola and Uber in ride hailing, the worker gets to know the rating after each trip. But in delivery, the workers only get to know weekly average of the ratings. So what platforms actually do, and they've been doing increasingly over COVID, is that they are manipulating these ratings, because it is on the basis of ratings that incentives are paid out to workers. So in order to cut those costs of incentive payouts, a worker would see that, till Saturday evening or Friday evening, he'll have 4.8 rating. But on Sunday, when the incentive structures are decided, that rating would go down to 4.14 or something. So, I mean, considering this fact that this data ownership is so unilaterally structured, suggestions around how ratings could be linked to credit guarantees and credit availability to workers need to really be thought through. That's one thing. The other thing about skilling, there's been conversation around how platform work assists in skill development. One first thing is that this is all self-skilling mostly. Many platforms do not offer on-the-job training or any sort of training. In fact, in ride-hailing work and delivery work and such platforms, trainings are hardly like half an hour, and mostly they are based on online videos and stuff like that. It's not really training. The second thing is that, if we look at it in a different way, actually platform work leads to a kind of de-skilling, because tasks are so atomized and divided into like, so a particular like urban company worker told me that, he wanted to learn, he's a hairstylist, he does hair cutting, but he wanted to learn hair coloring. He wanted to do how to do, curling hair and other kinds of things, but he's never able to do that because he only keeps getting orders on haircuts on urban company. So there's no way for him to upgrade his skills. So, that's another way in which we can look at skilling in the case of platform work. The last thing I want to talk about is around formalization itself. So, I'm a little confused about how platform work continues to be linked to formalization, despite evidence that after 6-7 years of platforms existing in the country, there has been little evidence on formalization. There have been no contracts which workers have been given. There's been, working conditions did improve, but then they went downhill. And now we see the conversation on social media, which delivery workers are leading. Working conditions are really gone downhill, and workers have little to no control over who they work for, how much they work in a day, all those things. So, and also like how Neha said, like, does formalization really need to be a goal? Like, do workers really think of the fact that they need contracts, that they need, many workers only want to make more money. And because the platforms have these, black box algorithms, which are controlling the way that they earn money, they are not able to decide how much they want to earn, have no control on how much they want to work to earn, a certain amount. So giving that kind of financial literacy and financial ability for workers to plan would be, I think, a better way to address that. And lastly, to address Nandana's question, I second everything that Professor Parthasarathy said. Cloud work is a completely different segment of platform work. Workers into this field also have a different background from where they come in. They have a particular skill structure, which skilled background, which workers in the geographically tethered sectors such as ride hailing, delivery, etc., do not have. And evidence on this sector is, growing, and we need to collect more evidence on that. But one of the things which I can say is that, despite the fact that many of these workers might be, students and coming from, particular backgrounds which have like a particular education level and skill levels, despite that, they are, the form of work is such that they're being reduced to these, one-off tasks which they have to complete within a given period of time. Without having any security, or along with this added precarity of whether they will have work the next day or not, whether they'll be able to control how much they want to work, etc. So just
we are sort of about 6 minutes past time.
Just one comment.
One comment. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah. So there is one on the chat box about use of blockchain technology. for preserving the ratings, right, in a non-repudiated manner. Of course, as you know, we are coming from IIIT Bangalore, we should say that, yes, of course, blockchain should be used in order to make these particular ratings non-repudiable, so that they can be used as says for credits and things like that. In fact, I must say that I think Mr. Thukral is already there. So the aggregator platform that we are conceptualizing and being rolled out will use all these technologies so that the non-repudiation and immutability is preserved.
Thanks, Sridhar. Like I said, we're about 7 minutes past time. So unless there's any truly pressing, compelling questions, shoot. Otherwise, do stay in touch with us. You have our whereabouts. You can write to us at IIITB. And on behalf of myself, Professor Sridhar, and Professor Preeti Mudaliar, I'd like to thank all of you, the experts, for sharing your ideas, the audience for making time this afternoon.